The Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute is driving bold policy solutions for a resilient Canadian agri-food system and building a stronger future for Canadian agriculture. Visit capi-icpa.com to discover how.
I am really pleased right now to have our next guest in. First time on the program. We're talking to USDA Deputy Secretary of Agriculture. It is Mr. Stephen Vaden. Deputy Secretary, it's great to have you here.
Good to be here with you, Sean.
Okay, lots happening right now in agriculture. I guess right off the top, let's start. What's the update on when we're going to hear news, the details of this farm bridge assistance that Secretary Rollins has been talking about?
Well, the Secretary has announced we're looking to make an announcement in December. As you know, the government was shut down thanks to the minority for 45 days, the longest government shutdown ever. So that would delay us in the natural course. But then in addition to that, the president was not shut down when Congress wasn't providing money, and he was going all over the world making new ag trade deals, not just with China, although that's the biggest one, but Southeast Asia, South Asia, even countries like Uzbekistan, and more recently in Central and South America. And we've got to take into account that new data and that new demand that will be coming in across a host of agricultural commodities as we look to what type of assistance will be needed.
Any details on, like, that's a good list, but what does it mean for agricultural exports? Because one of the things that I've been hearing from the farming audience is concern about agriculture kind of being on the periphery. You know, a lot of talk about automobiles and energy and planes, but what about ag? Where does ag fit into these new deals that you're talking about?
Well, all I can say with regard to that is who's ever telling you it's on the periphery, they haven't actually been in the negotiating room. Because when Secretary Bessent and when Secretary Lutnick and when Trade Representative Greer are meeting with countries, and it doesn't matter which one it is, the message is very simple. If you want to do a trade deal with the United States, and it doesn't matter what type of trade deal you want to do with the United States, you've got to allow our farmers access. And if you can't do that, there's no use in our continuing discussions. And that's why every single deal, every single framework you have seen has had an ag component.
Just going back to the bridge, the aid package, just for a second, how do you decide on whatever the top line number is going to be? How is it decided which commodity? How does that flow and how does that get allocated? Because a lot of tension right now on soybeans related to China, but there's a lot of hurt right now in the South, especially when you look at things like sorghum and cotton specifically.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. Do you focus solely on harms caused by trade? Or do you look at a greater set of harms, not all of which are caused by trade? Now, you mentioned sorghum. Sorghum is actually much more exposed to China than soy ever has been.
Yeah.
80% of their exports go to China. For soybeans, it's never been more than roughly a third. So if anyone has a right to jump up and down about China, it's sorghum. And strangely, they're not the ones who have been screaming. But when you look at broader harm, things like cotton, rice, these are commodities where their harms are not necessarily due to trade and certainly not due to China, but they're definitely not doing well. And so the question is, with the limited amount of funds that we have available, because we can't just print money here at USDA, we have to have it appropriated to us. How broadly do we want to go, with the understanding, of course, that the broader you go, that affects how much harm for each individual commodity can be covered. Similarly, the more narrow you go, you can solve more harm for a fewer number of commodities. And that's the trade-off that we'll have to consider.
In that list of countries, I don't think you mentioned India. That's one that I know a lot of farmers in the United States are watching very closely because they see a lot of demand opportunity there.
Well, India is probably the biggest market out there for which we have been, as of yet, unable to crack that nut. And one of the reasons why we haven't been able to crack it and why we don't have a trade agreement with India is because we haven't been able to reach accord on ag. And as I have mentioned, if a country wants to have a trade deal with the United States, they've got to provide access to our farmers. India isn't there yet. Therefore, it doesn't have a trade agreement with the United States at the moment.
Yeah, and now your two closest trading partners in geographically and economically, Canada and Mexico. Are there certain provisions or things that USDA is looking for there when it comes to those talks being on and off again?
Well, with regard to Canada and Mexico, we're encouraging all of our producers and all of our producer groups to take part in the public process that will kick off next year in terms of reviewing the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement. There is a public process that will include public hearings where ag, as well as all the other stakeholders, are going to be participating in panel hearings before the United States Trade Representative's office. With Canada, you probably already know the list. We've got dairy. We've got concerns about their taking American spirits and alcohol off the market in their provincial stores. And we have some concerns that have popped up recently as trade disputes have gone on between them. In Mexico, we've got a host of other concerns, including corn and whether they will continue to abide by the prior USMCA panel agreement, which says they cannot restrict American corn's access to their market. We've got tomatoes. We've got sugar. We've got concerns about China using Mexico as a situation to transship goods that are really Chinese in origin, but are claimed to be Mexican in origin across the border. There's even more to talk about there. But what's most important, as far as I'm concerned, is that ag's voice is heard. Fortunately, our trade representative is very attuned to ag issues. That's why he's having this public process. And I hope all of your listeners, whether they're part of the local farm bureau or part of any particular commodity group, will encourage their ag organizations to participate.
Tied to tariffs, a lot of focus right now on affordability. It is one of the number one concerns for Americans right now. We did see the president drop the tariffs on Brazilian beef, for example. That's going to have an impact on ground meat coming into the country. Where can USDA and even producers themselves, where do they fit into trying to help the president here solve this issue around affordability?
Well, obviously, we like it when as much of what we eat is grown or raised here in the United States. It becomes very difficult to do that with the ever increasing cost of production. That's why you have been seeing Secretary Rollins, as well as the president, focus on the cost of inputs. And for me, there are two particular areas that whenever we go on the road, the secretary and I, we hear about. It's fertilizer and it's farm equipment. Those are gigantic portions of any farmer's cost portfolio. And we need to take a close eye at how increased concentration in those two markets and individual decisions that, for example, farm machinery manufacturers have made, limiting what farmers can do when they purchase agricultural equipment from them. I mean, it's really become not even a rent to own type situation with some of this agricultural equipment, where they tell you where you can buy it, what parts you can put on it, and that you can't repair it, all of which has the ability of giving them pricing power. And so these are things that we need to take a very close look at, and I'm very grateful the president has directed the attorney general to do so.
Where does the steel and aluminum tariffs fit into that? Because the Association of Equipment Manufacturers and some of their members have talked about the impact of that from a cost perspective on that farm machinery at the end of the day.
Well, I can tell you that when you look at the farm equipment manufacturers, there's no tariff on service. There's no tariff with regard to which parts you choose from if you're an individual producer. And there's certainly no order from the President of the United States saying you cannot repair your own piece of equipment and that you can only buy a piece of farm machinery from the one dealer that is closest to you. Those have nothing to do with tariffs, and yet they all give the equipment manufacturers dramatic pricing power. And we have seen the price of farm equipment outpass inflation. We've also seen that with regard to fertilizer. And I think that's telling because those are the two input markets which have the greatest concentration when it comes to the number of possible manufacturers or suppliers which farmers have to choose to deal with.
One of the commodities that's got a lot of the president's attention as of late is the price of beef. One of the variables in what some have called like a perfect storm from a supply perspective, depending on maybe perfect, maybe not a proper description, depending on which side of the equation you're on here, but is the closure of the border to Mexican cattle coming north. Timelines on that, obviously, that's something that the secretary has been working very diligently on.
Well, it's got to be driven by science. We eliminated the screwworm in this country in the 1960s, and we sure as heck don't want it back. On the other hand, we're cognizant of the fact that because we have the smallest cattle supply, the smallest cattle herd since the 1950s, that's having an impact not just on consumers, but on huge corporations like Tyson, which, as you know, just announced on Friday the closure of a 5,000 head of cattle a day facility in Lexington, Nebraska. Absolutely horrible news for that small town of 10,000 people. 3,100 people lost their jobs with that announcement.
Wow.
You've got more than 1,500 additional who are losing their job as a result of the Amarillo Tyson plant going from 2 shifts to 1 shift. And that's all because we don't have enough cattle in this country to currently meet our production capacity. So beef, even though it has been depicted by some as a simplistic decision, it really isn't. Because in order for the supply chain to work, we need every cog in the wheel successfully taking part and making money. That's the farmer, that's the packer, and that's the grocery store. And of course, we want the consumer to pay a fair price that they can afford to pay. And at least a couple of those cogs right now, the consumer and the packer, are currently coming out on the short end of the equation. But we want American farmers to make money, and we want American farmers to build their herd size. And all of this is going to result in a series of policy decisions that we have to balance, focused on encouraging farmers and ranchers to increase their herd size here in the United States, while simultaneously trying to ensure in the shorter term that we don't have more announcements like we saw from Tyson on Friday, and we don't lose our processing capacity here in the United States to process the steaks we all like to eat.
And that timing that you're talking about here, that's one of the challenges with cattle is it's not poultry where you can change the direction of supply in pretty short order. Cattle's a much longer cycle, as a lot of our audience, and you know very well, it is one of the variables that presents a challenge here. The Packer loss, as you just described it, which is substantial and led to that Tyson plant closure. Talk about that in the face of the timing of the investigations into collusion from a Packer perspective. I know it's outside of your guys' department right now, but does the timing of that match?
Well, keep in mind a couple of things. Tyson doesn't just do beef. They're also involved in pork and poultry. The same for some of the other large beef packers. And when you expand it to all of protein, you can look in public federal court decisions. There have been multiple settlements and even findings by some federal judges that have gone to where the federal judge makes the decision, gone to trial, as it were, or gone to summary judgment, where we have findings that the antitrust laws have been violated. And we can't ignore that either. Two things can simultaneously be true. It can be true that on the beef side, the packers may be on the losing end of things, but when it comes to larger protein, poultry and swine, there are things to look at. And so it's helpful to keep in mind, even though the focus has primarily been on beef, that beef may be what's for dinner, but it's not the only thing for dinner. And we've got to be focusing on the entire protein picture in terms of ensuring that farmers are getting a fair deal.
Deputy Secretary Vaden, to wrap up here, I know you've got to run here, but the Secretary Rollins has talked a lot about the coming golden age of agriculture. What needs to happen for that to transpire and for farmers to be like, yes, it is the golden age of agriculture?
Well, first, we need to remember that in 2026, in the fall of 26, all the provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act kick in. That means we will have a new safety net primed with reference prices that actually reflect the current cost of production that will be permanent law. That is thanks to the Republican Congress and the president that goes into effect. And what we have to do to get from now to October of next year, a little less than a year, is what we're focusing on in terms of bridge payments. Looking at larger scope, we need two things. We need increased domestic demand, and that means more biofuels. And we need to continue racking up the RINs and trade deals because it can no longer be acceptable that American farmers are discriminated against. And one thing I'll point out on trade, Sean, while all of the focus from the popular press has been on China, I would encourage your listeners to pay particular attention to all the non-China trade deals. Vietnam, Pakistan, Japan, Cambodia, Uzbekistan, the Central and South American regions. These deals represent new demand. These deals represent true pluses in the column that when applied on top of the baseline of China of 25 million metric tons, for example, of soybeans going forward, starting next calendar year and every year for the remainder of the president's term, represent actual growth in sales. And it's building on those incremental deals involving not China, everybody but China, that's going to make the difference. And then if we can add on top of that something like E15, greater use of biofuels like soy and biodiesel, which the EPA's proposal under the renewable volume obligation will do, and talk for the first time of reallocation. This will really make a difference to the American farmer and begin to add up. And you've already seen that the markets note that because before these deals came online, the price of soy on the futures market, as you know, was 10 and change. We're now looking around 11.40, 11.50. That's a dollar increase in the past couple of weeks. That's real money. And that adds up very quickly when you're talking about bushels. And that's the direction we need to go.
Deputy Secretary Vaden, really appreciate you joining us here today on the program and look forward to our next chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean.